Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to the February Community Webcast. My name is Caitlin Lamb. I'm a Product Marketing Manager for Agile Central. And here with me today for this webcast is Clay Tidwell. He is a Customer Success Manager on the team, and he's going to be presenting on a really exciting topic called release level reporting. And he'll go through a presentation and demo to show how are you actually performing within your releases. We will be collecting Q&A throughout this presentation. I encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature to the right of your screen. We'll be saving Q&A for the very end where we'll address your questions, so please hang with us. And there will also be an option to give an audio question at the end if you prefer to do that as well. I just want to remind everyone that we will be recording this webcast and uploading the replay to the Agile Central community along with the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll find that on the Agile Central community within a few business days. And without further ado, I will pass it on over to Clay to give an introduction of himself and to get started.
Thanks, Caitlin. So yes, my name is Clay Tidwell. I am a Customer Success Manager for Agile Central here at CA, so I work exclusively with that platform. I'm glad Caitlin described this as being exciting. I'm glad someone thinks it's exciting. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily view this sort of stuff like that, but it's a good place to start. So a couple of things. We call it release level reporting. Really, this is about Agile metrics is what we're going to talk about over the next probably 35 or 40 minutes. And how are the teams sort of telling themselves, whether or not they're delivering what they say they're going to deliver, whether, there's any problems within a particular release. And then that's the other word I like to make sure we get clarification on. Anyone who's used Agile Central for any amount of time knows that we don't talk about releases like deployments. A release is really, it's a broader time box. So when we say within a release, we're talking about, multiple iterations. Maybe it's, maybe you're running 2-week sprints. So a release would be 3 of those. It would be a 6-week time box, or maybe it would be 4 of those, an 8-week time box. So it's another way of looking at data, and it's also, there's ways of rolling multiple teams in as well. So now you're looking, you kind of got your scrum of scrums, so you can actually kind of look at data across multiple teams within releases. You can look at data within, across multiple teams within PIs. There's power in that. Beyond just the, what you would ordinarily do in terms of like, 2-week sprints, 1 team, give us a burn down, what's that look like? But there's also a lot of similarities, right? So, we talk about team health, excuse me, and these are sort of, these are ideas that come out of actual customers, sort of dictates in terms of like what they view as being healthy within their teams. They want to accept 80% or more of the work that they put into the beginning of a sprint or at least by the end of that release. Stable velocities, or even better, you want to improve velocities over time. Making sure, there's an adherence to WIP limits, so we're not violating WIP limits, over any length of time. And what's the throughput look like? Is it stable or increasing like velocity, or was it just, are we decreasing? Is it erratic? Like, what is going on there? If we have some problems with throughput, and then this is a big one with these broader time boxes is how much work is being injected into a team's backlog. So it's interesting. I heard someone describe it at a conference, in that injection of work into an iteration is really kind of a violation of an Agile best practice. It's something you don't want to do, but it's not uncommon to sort of float features in or float user stories into PIs or broader releases. So how is that being reflected? How are we making ourselves aware that work is coming into these backlogs, and is it being done with the same level of thoughtfulness as with the original plan? So there's ways to track all of this. We'll talk about that in a second. Quickly, we did talk about the idea of a release and like what sort of time box that is. This is kind of our Agile onion where we look at our vision, our roadmap, and then our release time box. So teams may decide on 1 or 2 important metrics to add to a dashboard to sort of reflect this release time box. Then they might add a couple over time. I think it's up to the team. I think it's really important that the team make the decisions on this. And then the other thing is I think it's important not to have to pull up a dashboard and have 11 dashboard, 11 sort of metrics running at any given time, or 10, or you really don't want to get in to this, they call it paralysis by analysis. You can have too much data. You want to make sure you're dialed in to what your team is doing, and that everyone knows what's going on. They know if there's any problems, they can identify those problems. And the whole idea behind these metrics is that they display those to us. They show us what's happening with our team, inspect, adapt, and improve. So this is just an example. Again, this is probably more for newer users, but you can see here where we're planning at the release level, and you can see on the team planning page, we're working within, we're planning for release 2. That's running across multiple iterations. And in this particular page, we're actually planning at the feature level. So this is something a lot of organizations are moving to, where they sort of prioritize these features and they break the features down into their user stories. And you can see on the right side of the screen, we're actually planning across 4 iterations in this case. So it becomes important at that point to actually be tracking data across those 4 iterations. It's good. We want to look at our 2-week sprints. We want to know how we're doing. We want to know if the work is burning down. But just as important, we want to know how we do as a team across this 8-week period, this 8-week time box, this broader release. And we've got some good tools for this. So I'm really just as a kind of disclaimer here. Like if you're writing if you're using JavaScript to write your own apps, if you're creating really elaborate custom queries, a lot of what I talk about might seem mundane, but I do think it's important to stick to the basics here and make sure everyone knows what's available sort of out of the box, right, without kind of going crazy. And kind of the first way to track releases, and if anyone uses iteration status, this will look very familiar, but we have an app called the Release Tracking Board. It's in the app catalog. You can see it gives us really the same information that we would get using the iteration status page, but now we're looking at release 2, and you can see on the left-hand top of the screen, R2, it gives us the same sort of metrics, so we can see what our feature point burn down is. You can see what when the release ends. We've got a good idea of what our estimates look like, how many stories have been accepted, and then we can drive into the actual work items, and we can see where we stand here with with feature 4. We've got a handful of tasks there. One of them has been accepted, and then 4 of them are not even in progress yet. So again, this is a great way just to look at the sort of broadest swath of work that's being done in a particular release, and again, straight out of the app catalog on this. Enhanced velocity is another good way to sort of view this sort of work. So the dark green bars here are looking at the total amount of accepted work, right? And this is work that's delivered by the last day of an iteration. The light green bars, if they exist, will show the total amount of accepted work delivered since the last day of the iteration. So we're moving, kind of that 80+%. Maybe there's some work that got accepted beyond the actual iteration. And then if there's clear bars, that would represent the work done during the iteration that wasn't accepted. So we might have a couple stories there in iteration 5 that were completed but not necessarily accepted by the product manager. And then this dark green line right across the top, you can kind of see it there. It runs through the bars. It shows the proposed velocity over the past iterations. So this is a great view into sort of what my team is capable of. Really, especially when you start doing like scrum of scrums or big room planning. So, if a product owner wants to complete 500 story points over a certain amount of time, and I'm just pulling a number out of nowhere, we know that the development team can complete, say, 50 story points per iteration, so we're going to need 10 iterations. So we're starting to get an idea of how much work we can do over this big period of time, right? And that's important. Like, you can't do PI planning, you can't do this sort of release planning unless you have a good idea of what your teams can do. One thing I would also say about this is new teams can typically expect to see an increase in velocity, right? I mean, that's kind of common sense. Existing teams track velocity just to make sure they're getting a consistent performance over time. So you just want to make sure everything's in line. If we see velocity drop, then there should be a good reason for it. If velocity starts to increase, maybe the team is starting to norm and starting to work together more effectively, then we know that we're capable of doing a little more than what we did maybe over the past couple of iterations. So again, a great metric really comes in handy when it's time to start planning to know what my team is capable of. There's another app out of the app catalog. This is just a release and iteration burn down, but you can see we can look at sort of bigger time boxes. We're not just looking at 2 weeks here. So this burn down chart tracks progress over just a much broader body of work than the sprint burn down, right? And it's a good guide for development for Scrum and Kanban, and it can contain work from several different iterations or what we would call a release. So again, like scope creep in an iteration, kind of bad practice. When you're working in these releases or these PIs, it's just sort of the price of doing business. So it's important to know when you're experiencing creep, maybe why you're experiencing creep, and to address that, right? Like, is this something that we need to work with business on to eliminate in the future? Or is this something that's becoming a problem, or can we handle the creep? Are we able to sort of prioritize and reprioritize as we get these injections of maybe additional features or stories? One thing to look for in a chart like this is progress being made over several iterations, and if not, why not? And like I just mentioned, is the scope creep chronic? That could be a sign that maybe the product owner is taking on work, not understanding that it's work that we can't absorb as a team. Is the scope growing faster than the team can absorb it, right? Because that means we're going to start dropping work that we may have prioritized previously. So that can be a problem. And also, like, just making sure that the team is shipping incrementally throughout the development of an epic or a release or however we're going to phrase this, again, with the broader time box. There's also the release burn up, and I've got burned down on there. That's kind of a mistake. Apologize for that. But a burn up is going to track how much work is done. I think a burn up shows a little more information because it has, it gives us this line showing how much work is in the project as a whole. This burn up chart displays work delivered within a release. Again, you can see it's going a little further out than just the 2-week period. With this particular chart, and this is you can get this in the app catalog, or you can pull it out of the reports. You can hover on one of the sections of a line, and it'll display the number of units accepted. So you can see the vertical axis, and I know, again, this is very remedial, very beginner, but just in case, make sure everyone's on the same page. But the vertical axis represents amount of accepted work in hours, in this case. Horizontal axis represents the dates that are contained within the release. And then the completed story points are represented by green bars. And in this case, it's a burn up, so we're moving up. Because as something is accepted, you would expect that line to sort of grow, right, to increase in size. So total scope of work in the release is represented by the black line. Again, you can hover over the bars. This is very different than a burn down because it includes that scope line. And again, you can start looking for, why is that line staying sort of the same there? Are we done work? Why is work not completed yet? Are we injecting work into our backlogs, and maybe that's why it's remaining the same? So, it's not going to answer a lot of questions, but it will help you ask some questions with your team and help you move into solutioning that and making sure that the work that's being assigned is getting done. So this actually exists within the platform. This is on the release tracking page, on the portfolio page. I like to show this because I think it's a great sort of summation of what's going on with the team over in this case a quarter, so a quarter's worth of work. So in this case, you can see there's you can see a good description of what's going on below with our preliminary estimate, plan points, accepted points, and release points. So the sum of the preliminary estimates for all features in a list is what that preliminary estimate bar is. So this really indicates the high-level scope of the release. This scope is only going to change when a feature is added or removed from the release. So again, we're looking at scope change. We're seeing, when things are added or taken out of a particular release. So plan points in this case, and you can see the plan points with the sort of bar down there. That's the sum of plan estimate values of stories and I believe defects in a feature of a list. And there's also includes any unparented stories or defects. So this value would change when a feature is added as well. Again, it gives us an idea if there's some scope change going on. If we're adding user stories to features, maybe as a way of kind of getting them included. There's also the accepted points bar, and that's the light green. You can barely see those up there. But there is an accepted points sum here, and that's the sum of plan estimate values of stories and defects when the schedule state is moved to accepted. And then release points is the sum of the estimate values of stories and defects when the schedule state is released. So again, once it's really out the door, we get an idea of like, you know, where we stand. So this value is 0 if the release state is not used. Excuse me. And then one thing to pay attention to at this is the chart shows accepted points stacked on top of released. The release point value does not include work that is in an accepted state. That's a little confusing, but it's kind of important in that, again, it's kind of showing us a differentiation between sort of released and accepted in this case. One other really kind of what I love about this particular chart is I can click on a row into just a particular feature or group of user stories, and if I hover over it, it'll show me a lot more detail. So again, this is a native sort of graph within the portfolio manager. It's on the release tracking page. There's a graph icon in there, and if you are using that page and we're not aware of this, then this is a really great one to sort of track progress over, again, sort of a much longer period of time than just a single iteration. So we also see a lot of people using milestones to burn up, and while it's not necessarily related to a release, oftentimes it can be related to a deployment or to something else of significance to the business. So, you know, a trade show, or maybe we're trying to get a bunch of work put together in time for a beta release. So the milestone burn up just shows how work is tracking to a target date, right? And in this case, the target date is sometime in July, around 7/4, maybe a little beyond. The blue line here indicates scope. Again, that word, you know, we're always paying attention to scope. And the green bars are the accepted work on a given date. So you can see that this is burning up towards our, you know, whenever this is, sometime in August probably. And this is what you want to see. This is the one thing with some of these, I pull a lot of these either from the platform or from the support pages, and the data sets are almost too perfect looking. This is almost too perfect looking. But if you're doing everything right, driving towards you know, that August 1st target date, then this is what it should look like. This is what your milestone burn up should look like. So this is one of my favorites because I actually used this prior to coming to rele/CA. The enhanced Burndown, which really tells a pretty powerful story, and it does so, again, across a release rather than just a single iteration. So in this case, each blue bar shows the plan estimate. So the total of plan work, this includes user stories, defect suites, anything that we're working on within a feature. So if the team doesn't estimate using the plan estimate field, then there's going to be a flat line. So you actually have to do some manual work when you're doing your estimates. What I like about this is the red bar. So below that baseline, you can see those red bars. That shows the total plan estimate of user stories and defect suites that were scheduled after the start of the release day. So that baseline is when we actually started working. The blue lines are my original scope, and then that red line is showing me if I'm adding scope. Again, this is an important metric, right? This is something that's going to happen when you do work over you know, longer periods of time, and it's important that we're able to visualize that and to be able to see what exactly is going on with our work. So in this case, you can also, it'll start to generate. You can see here we've got a legend on here. It'll generate our sort of prediction line. So the blue line is just a trend based on the blue bar data, so the planned work that's not completed, whereas the red line represents the trend based on all our red bar work, so work that was added after the start date, if there is any. At some point, those two bars will intersect, and that will indicate our predicted release date. So again, this is really a chart that will show you some problems if you have them, especially with adding scope after a particular date when work is supposed to start. But it'll also tell you, you know, when the actual release date is, and you can start making decisions about maybe you have to pull some of that work, some of the blue bar work out. Maybe you have to stop accepting some of the red bar work, some of the, you know, the not planned for work that from the original plan. It's, again, these are business decisions. This chart isn't going to solve them, but it is certainly going to point out any issues you may have with that added scope. But again, it will give that prediction for release as well, which I think is a nice piece of functionality. So under the track button in the navigation, there's this the release metrics page. So this is an older page. It's got an older UI, but I think there's a ton of value in this particular page. So this really is just a big picture view of the work you're doing. It's categorized by iterations. You can see there, you know, we're working across Q3 here. You know, we've got this set up to view what we call Q3, but it does break down work by iteration. So iterations 5, 6, and 7 are represented here. It shows me what the total number of work are that's scheduled, so I can see, you know, how many work items in total. Amount of units available per iteration, so that's really planned velocity. And then, you know, we get ideas like I can see if there's test cases, how many of those test cases are passing, what the percent is that's been accepted from the original plan, active defects, which I think is a great metric to pay attention to, especially, you know, you start working across a 6-week or 8-week time box. You really want to make sure your teams are not being inundated with defects. You know, that can become a real problem and certainly a blocker to release. So with this, again, you can select a release from the drop-down there up on top left. You can click any iteration listed in the summary page to view the detail page. It'll pull up the iteration detail page. And this really gives you just an overview of all your work items and what the team is up to in the work items. And again, this is a native page, so go to track and there you'll see release metrics. Another little bit older page, so this is the release status page. So this is a great page. You can actually pull up defects and test suites on here. The release defect status page is what some people call this, but it's a release task status, really. You can see there I've got my user stories. I can see what state they're in. I can view this by release. You can see there up again on the top left. You can see there we're working on release 2. So again, iterations 5, 6, and 7. If I click on the little defect icon, it'll show me just the defects. Right now, I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at status for all of my work items, but I can view just the defects by clicking on the defect page. And then all of these charts and columns will show me cumulative totals for products that have the same release name and end date. So once they're all planned in a particular release, then they will show up in this page, and I'll see, you know, what the plan estimates are. If there's any task estimates, they'll be there. Any to-do by hour, you can see that there in the chart. So again, just a nice broad overview. I can see which team it belongs to. If there's an individual owner, I can see that as well. So again, it's just another way to track work within a broader release. All right, so a fairly non-realistic looking cumulative flow, but still it's a cumulative flow. So this has become a key resource for Kanban teams, although I do know other groups are starting to use cumulative flow as well. And you can see, again, we're looking at the shopping team and what they're doing for release 1. So, you know, ideally, as I think most people know, a cumulative flow diagram should look pretty smooth from left to right. So any like bubbles or, you know, pop-ups like you see in the defined piece there typically indicate some sort of bottleneck, right, or a resource shortage or some sort of problem within process. So, you know, when a team sees one, when they see one, especially looking in a release cumulative flow diagram, it's up to the team to make some decisions about what's going on and what they can do to correct that. This diagram displays amount of plan estimate units per state for all stories. So I kind of wrote that down so I wouldn't forget it. So the y-axis, excuse me, on here is the plan estimates displayed in units, and then the x-axis is each day of the release. So you can see down below, you know, May 2nd moving all the way across to June 21st, and then the plan estimates running up along the y-axis. So again, it's a little too good looking to be real, but if you look at like the accepted, the green bar here, the green flow here, that's really what you're looking for. You're looking at work to be accepted on a regular cadence as a team moves through a release. You'll accept more and more and more as you reach the end of the release. You know, it should be nothing but green, really. If you're starting to see, you know, these bubbles in the defined, it looks like we're defining more and more work. We're still accepting, but again, it's something you want to maybe talk to the team about. Are we taking in more work than the team can accommodate? All right, so this is a protege kind of told me to put this in here because he likes this, the release scope change. This is a good chart. Again, we're back to scope change, right? So this app displays all of our work, so all of our user stories, defects that have been added or removed from a release. So it just gives us a really tight, succinct view of whether scope is changing during the course of a release. So you can view the day-by-day report of work items here, if they were added or removed from a particular release. You can click on a work item with the formatted ID there and navigate to the detail page and actually see, you can see the description, who owns it, if there's any information there that you might need that's not presented on this page. You can filter reports here by work added and removed. I believe you can print from this page, which is a nice piece of functionality if you like printing. And again, this is all about just understanding what's going on within our release. Is there any change that we need to know about? If so, like, where is that change coming from? And again, this isn't going to prevent it from happening, but you want to make sure that you're putting some thought into any sort of injections of work into backlogs and ensure that your teams are reaching the end of this release successful. It's successful, that they've done all their work, everything's tested and accepted, and they've done what they committed to do. And then I pull these just because I think they're worth pulling. And this is for portfolio users, specifically for users who are using the capacity planning page. If nothing else, hopefully this might incent you to start looking at capacity planning and maybe kind of maximizing your usage here within the portfolio. So this is what we call the plan progression page. This is a big step forward for us. So this came out of a problem that exists with groups that do big room planning or kind of large scrum of scrum plannings. So they sit down and with great amount of thought and intention, they make a plan, and then within a week or two, the plan changes, right? So that's sort of inevitable in software. The idea behind this page is, do we understand what those changes are, and were they made with the same level of intentionality as the original plan? So this page allows for that alignment, making sure there's clear information across the organization on what's changed, and then having conversations about why it's changed. So you can see in the top left, you can see our time box there from 10/9 to 1/12, so we're working across Q4 there. We can see there's just sort of a dynamic plan tracker there, so I can see work completed by story points at 49%, and I can see the time elapsed by work days at 23%. What I think makes this really powerful is I can also start to look at if there's any new features added since 10/9/2017, those are added to this list. So you can see there's 4 features that have been added to this particular plan that we did. Again, did we put that into the backlog knowing that we might lose some of our other features, and it looks like we have removed a feature. Or was this sort of done, kind of willy-nilly, as they like to say. So the idea here is intentionality and thoughtfulness, and making sure that if we make any changes to that original plan, that we know what those changes are, and we know why we're making those changes. And then this is just the program increment scope chart. So this is a part of the plan progression, and really this is just a graphic display of what we just looked at. So that baseline is the start date. You can see that there's work in progress there, and how this sort of work in progress kind of progresses along. You can see those dark blue lines that we've got some additions to the work in progress, and you can see where we've had to remove some work to accommodate those additions. So again, this is kind of a flow chart, but it gives us a sort of graphic representation of what's going on within our PI, right? Like what's going on within these broader time boxes. Are we including this work with thoughtfulness, or are we just kind of throwing it in? And if we are, what are we losing? So what sort of work are we having to remove that we're going to have to account for later, within our planning session? So again, what we just looked at, that scope increment chart, and then the plan progression. This is available on the portfolio module. So if you're using if you're using portfolio, then you have access to this. However, it does depend on you creating a plan within capacity planning and publishing that plan. So if it's something you're interested in, maybe you're not, made the jump to capacity planning, I encourage you to reach out to your customer success managers. If that happens to be me, just shoot me an email, give me a call. If it's someone else, get in touch with them and see if you guys can't get enabled on that, because I think this is a great page for tracking change and making sure that at the end of a PI, your teams are going to come in successfully. So those are the, like I said, those are the basic metrics for tracking within these broader time boxes, within these releases or PIs. I think at this point, there's probably some questions. I'll have a look. I'm going to stop sharing, however, because I know Caitlin had a couple of things that she wanted to talk about. So Caitlin, I've stopped sharing.
Great, thanks Clay. Thanks for all those great examples that you shared. We do have some time for Q&A, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature to the right. But I just wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the great offerings that we have for CA Agile Academy. For those of you on the call, or if you have any colleagues that are new to using Agile Central and want to learn more about getting the most out of this solution, I recommend the end-to-end class that we're offering in the Boulder, Colorado location, March 6th through 7th. We also have a number of Agile certification classes available that we offer all year round in various locations across the country that you see below. And if you want to learn more about any of these Agile Central classes or Agile certifications that will help you advance in your Agile journey, please visit agileacademy.ca.com. And remember that the earlier you register, you can save money. So if you register early, you have the option to save up to $200. So definitely look into that and spread the word to your teams. I do see that we have some questions rolling in. So Clay, do you want to take that away?
Yes, definitely. So there's one question. Someone asked about the plan overview. So it's actually plan progression. Let me go ahead. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So yeah, so if you go to portfolio and you click on plan progression, this is the page that I was showing. Again, you're going to have to create something in capacity planning. You're going to create a plan. In this case, we created this calendar year 2018 roadmap. And once we load that, then it'll load up all of my data from the capacity planning. So again, it does require that you have a plan published in capacity planning, or at least created. But once you do, you can then go to plan progression. You can pull it up, and it will pull the data in terms of features, and once features start getting added and completed, you'll see that reflected. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question. If not, please let me know. You can reach directly out to me, and yeah, that'd be great. So someone else asked if we're going to cover any new reports. I don't know that we necessarily have any new reports. I don't know that we have anything on the roadmap for that. So yes, this was just a review of sort of existing canned. I apologize, Randy. I tried to sort of set the table for that at the beginning, but no, we don't have necessarily any new metrics for covering this, and I didn't want to dive too deep into the Get repository.
Great, and if anybody else has any questions, or if you want to ask an audio question, feel free to press #6 on your keypad to ask a question, and we'll just wait a few moments to collect any last-minute questions coming through.
Question on the phone.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the release scope change, you were showing that, and you said, you know, stuff is added, stuff is removed. So is your plan set at the start date of the release, and then the plus is any stories added after that date, and the minus is any stories removed after that date?
That's exactly right. That's sort of, you know, that's kind of the 0 day. And then if you look at a couple of the velocity apps, like that enhanced velocity app, you can actually set it to skip a day. You know, because oftentimes, as you probably know, like, you know, when you come out of planning, there might be an addition, and you don't necessarily want that to be reflected, or you might kill one of the stories. You don't want that to be reflected. So you can see that in the enhanced velocity chart by saying, look, you know, day 0 is actually a day after the start of this iteration. But for all these other ones, it's on the day that starts, sort of the clock is ticking on that, yes.
But if you have 6-sprint PI with 2-week sprints, let's say that you flesh out in PI planning, most of your stories, but then, maybe 25% of your stories get fleshed out during the PI. Those would all add up as added to the release, right?
They would, and I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Like you're not necessarily setting off alarm bells unless you look at that chart and you see a bunch of stories that are added and you have no idea where they came from. I think, and like I said, sort of start this, it's not only likely, it's probably even a little desirable, right? As you hone stories, or as maybe not even scope has changed, maybe you kind of define a feature, so you have to add a couple stories. Like that's kind of the natural progression when you're doing this PI planning. The point of most of these apps is just to display that, right? Just to kind of surface it and make sure there's transparency there. It doesn't mean there's a problem necessarily. It just means, look, I know that these were added. I know why these were added. I'm fine with it. Or, where did these come from? I mean, that might be the case too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Does anybody have any additional questions for Clay?
Hey, and just one more thing. So, Randy, if you want to reach out to me directly, we can find your CSM and certainly do a little deeper dive, or if anyone else wants to. Again, I stuck to sort of the baseline here, and just I showed kind of the basics of what you can do within the platform without having to without having to write scripts or pull custom apps. But we're certainly we're always open to doing a little deeper dive. So. Find your CSM, reach out to your CSM, and schedule some time.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Clay, for giving a great presentation and sharing some great examples with us today. And thank you for everybody on the call who took time out of your day to join this webcast. If any of you have any questions that come up later on, feel free to get in touch with your customer success rep or post a question on the community. Again, this replay and the presentation will be uploaded in a few days, so feel free to share with your colleagues and definitely join us for our next March community webcast, which will be posted within the next couple weeks or so. But thank you everybody again, and have a nice day.